Welcome back to The Forge. How do we understand and perceive unity? That is a theme which binds the last three sayings of the second 18 together. And in a moment, we're going to be looking at 2:16, 2:17, and 2:18. Now, we also have to remember that this second 18 has a principal theme that is also running through the sayings. And that is from the second half of 1.1. And that is, and when they find, they will be troubled. And if they are troubled, they will become amazed. And they will reign over all, and in reigning they shall find rest. So all those elements, troubled, amazed, reigning, and rest, they all weave themselves in and out of this second 18. So let's just start by reading out the three sayings. Now, between them, they're actually quite long, but as I say, woven in there is understanding and then also sensing and retuning and perceiving what unity is so that we can move in that direction. That's what we're going to do. So, 2:16. Jesus saw some little infants at the breast. He said to his followers, "These little ones at the breast are like those who will enter the kingdom." They said to him, "Then if we become like little ones, shall we enter the kingdom?" And he said to them, "When you make the two one, and when you make the inside as the outside, and the outside as the inside, and the upper side as the lower side, when you make the male and the female into single ones, so that the male is no longer male, nor the female female, when you make an eye in the place of an eye, a hand in the place of a hand, a foot in place of the foot, and an image in place of an image, then you will enter into the kingdom." 2:17. Do not be anxious from morning to evening and from evening to morning about what you shall put on. You are far better than the lilies of the valley that neither card nor spin. When you have no garments, what will you put on? Who can add to your life? He will give you your garments. 2:18. They said, "When will you appear to us, and when will we be able to look upon you?" He said, "When you strip naked and are not ashamed, and take your garments and put them beneath your feet like little children, and trample on them, then you will see the Son of the Living One, and you shall not fear." Now, there is also a link here that I'd like to add to this, which is 2.9. I stood in the midst of the world, and I appeared to them in flesh. Let's begin with 2:16. Are we to become like little children so that we can enter into the kingdom? There is a misinterpretation here that we can see from those followers. It's not about acting like small children. It's about refinding the state of consciousness that infants have. And when we speak about infants, we're talking about very young, newly born, those who are still connected to the living spirit, to the living consciousness. They are still connected to that non-physical realm. So Jesus is saying, in order to discover that non-physical state, we have to be able to get back to that frequency. We have to find that state within ourselves. And that means that we have to do the hard work of becoming aware of our fears, phobias, beliefs, habits, patterns, all those things that shape and have become us. And that can be a long process. That is months or years of shedding the familiar self. When we do that, this place of stillness, this place of consciousness begins to emerge. Now, it is the fasting, it is the meditation and the understanding what meditation does that takes us to that place of consciousness. So we can enter that, albeit briefly usually. But if we know what it is that we are trying to do, then that is one of the steps that helps us daily to find that place where we can fast from ourselves and the world around us. That is what Jesus is saying here. You have to be able to mesh or immerse yourself into the same place. It's like water dropping into water. That's what he's saying. You have to get yourself to the same state from the physical side so that you can enter the non-physical. And his explanation is the second part of this saying. When you make the two one, the physical and the non-physical, and you understand that the outside and the inside, up and down, male and female, these contradictory parts are actually all part of the same thing. They are all part of the creation, which is the living consciousness. And that there is no real in and out, up and down, male and female. Those are aspects of ourselves that we understand as physical human beings. And they're just being laid before us. They're saying, these are the kind of the edge of the boundaries that we currently have. What we need to understand is that actually they're two parts of the same thing, and that wholeness is union. That's a very difficult concept for us to understand because our brains work in this way of dividing things up. There is this kind of comparative mindset that we have so that we can figure out and understand the world around us. We need contrast so that we can see how things are put together. Now, yes, we can see that in the physical world, but mentally and emotionally, we need those contrasts as well, because that's what reflects on who we are and how we think about the world, how we perceive everything. So the saying here leads into this, where you take an eye for an eye and a hand for a hand and a foot with a foot, and an image that replaces an image. That is showing us that what gets replaced is the familiar self, the ego, that thing which is constructed from interactions from the physical world, that gets replaced. That gets replaced with the living spirit, which is connected to a consciousness beyond that. But we need to have that understanding first. We need to start looking at the world first. We can't replace something if we don't know what we're going to replace it with. And it is our perception and our retuning and our understanding and knowledge of the non-physical which creates the opportunity for us to sense it. And we usually begin to sense it because it is a very different feeling. It's a very different energy than the physical self. And that's how it first starts to happen. You realize that you are these two different things. You are this being that you sense and feel during meditation, or when you're studying the sayings, you get this sense of support, this presence that happens. And you kind of drop into that while you're contemplating, while you're figuring this thing out. And then there is you that gets up in the morning and it goes to work and it goes shopping and it does the everyday normal physical things. And you realize that you are these two different beings. It's a very, very peculiar sense that you get. There's almost like this divide between the two. But the important thing is that you can feel it. That's the important thing, is that you suddenly realize, wow, I am these two different entities. As time goes on, you find that those two are coming together. Now, you might be one of those people that has an instant awakening, but mostly we don't. Mostly it is a path that is taken, and we deconstruct the familiar self and what holds it together through understanding it. And then we reconstruct it because we have knowledge of the non-physical, and also because we can retune our senses to sense that presence that descends on us. It's an extraordinary thing. So 216 is guiding us towards that place of sensitivity, and also the knowledge that we can bring those comparatively separate parts of ourselves into the unity where there is just one. But that place of oneness encompasses all of those external and internal places. 217. Do not be anxious from morning to evening and from evening to morning about what you shall put on. We are entering back into that place of garments. Now, that first part is from the Coptic version of the Gospel of Thomas. But there is a Greek papyrus version which adds more to this, and it's only when you put those two together that you kind of get a much bigger picture of what this saying is all about. You are far better than the lilies of the valley that neither card nor spin. It's telling us that you are far more evolved than a plant that has very little purpose other than to look beautiful. And they've chosen the lily because the lily isn't an edible and you can't turn it into a product. It's just a beautiful looking thing. And if we relate that back to the first part of the saying, he's saying, don't be stressed and anxious about what you're going to wear to make yourself look great, to make yourself look beautiful, to add to your position in the world. He's saying, no. You're above that. You're a far more evolved being than that. And the saying continues, when you have no garments, what will you put on? This is a direct reference to the living spirit. It is saying, what will you put on when you are just a spirit and you have no body? Where are your garments? He's showing us here that what you are. The eternal part of you is a living spirit. The temporary part of you is a physical being. When you know that, you realize that the physical being is a host, is a temporary host. However important your physical life is, whatever status, whatever position you attain, whatever wealth or positioning you kind of get to, it's just a temporary kind of being. And actually, there are times within the sayings that you see that the saying is directly aimed at the living spirit. It's less about the human part, and it's this recognition that there is this eternalness to us. When you have no garments, what will you put on? Who can add to your life? He will give you your garment. Wow, fascinating. Who and what will give you the body? Who can add to your status? You are a living spirit on an eternal journey of reincarnation. What this is saying is that it is the living consciousness that creates the opportunity. It is a blessing or a gift to come into a physical body. Who can add to your status? The who here is the living consciousness. It has created this process where living spirits can enter a physical body. That's our evolutionary path. That's what has been created for us to evolve, not only as human beings throughout this lifetime that we had, but for the living spirit to evolve on its journey of maturity. We're now looking at this far greater picture. We have this far greater understanding of the totality of what we are. That's the bit that we're trying to understand here. Who will give you your garment? The physical body is the garment in this situation. Quite astonishing. 2:18. They asked, when will you appear to us and when will we look upon you? He said, when you strip naked and you are not ashamed, and you take your garments and you put them underneath your feet like little children and trample on them. When you strip naked and are not ashamed. Ashamed here is being used as the catch-all for all human emotions. Mentally, emotionally, those ideas that you have about yourself that dictate your everyday interactions with other people. And what we've sort of highlighted here is that ashamed is one of those unconscious patterns that directs how we interact with other people. Well, there are hundreds of those, but this one is being seen as the sort of the tip of the iceberg. It's bringing our attention to what makes us do what we do. And then Jesus says, when you take your garments and you trample them beneath your feet like little children. So on one level we can see that is children taking off their clothes like they do when they're small, and they run around naked, completely free of any kind of bonds, or completely unaware that they should or could or couldn't run around naked, and trample them. We don't need our clothes. Lots of children do that. They run around trampling on the clothes that they've just taken off, particularly at bedtime. Jesus is saying that is the state that we need to enter. Well, you can stand naked in the middle of a shopping mall without any thought or any embarrassment of where you are and who you are and what shape you are. It's an extraordinary insight that we have here. Now, there is a second layer to this, as there are with many of these sayings. The little children can also be seen as our living spirit. And the garment can be seen as our physical bodies. When the physical body dies and the living spirit is released to continue its journey, the trampling of the garment, the trampling of the physical, can be seen as the body going into the grave, going into the ground. And the living spirit has no attachment to it. It is here for the journey, unless unity happens. No, leads to a different state. But in most cases, there is no recognition of the living spirit from the human being. And so when the human body dies, there's no attachment to that body. The living spirit continues, it finds another body and it reincarnates again and again and again. So that is another way that we are being shown that garments can be discarded and then trampled upon. That is just showing us that there is no attachment to that particular body. And Jesus says, it is then that you will see the Son of the living one being the living consciousness, and the Son being the global consciousness, what we could be described as a Jesus consciousness, that consciousness that he was attached to, which is to do with evolution. Jesus is saying when you lose your physical body, you enter into that state or that realm of consciousness. That is when you have this broader picture. That is when you have that understanding of what you are, but it only happens from the living spirit side. In unity, something new happens. Your consciousness, which has now dropped the familiar self, now attaches itself to the living spirit, and the living spirit takes on a new form. That's what happens in unity. Physical body dies, but there is a consciousness now which is now attached to the living spirit. There's a lot more explanation of that as we go through. That's another level of our understanding which will be opened up. Now there is a link to 2.9 because we've just looked at 2.18. There is a link to 2.9, which is exactly halfway back through the 18. That's one of these links that happens, these mathematical links that you suddenly spot within the sayings. I stood in the midst of the world and I appeared to them in flesh. And it wants us to re-look at what that means. That is that higher consciousness that Jesus was connected to. I appeared to them in flesh. That is that consciousness coming through the physical body in a person of unity. And it is one of those underlying thoughts that we need to have within us that shows us that there is a possibility for that also to happen to us. That we can move beyond the understanding that we are just a physical body, and that we can properly experience the state of non-physical consciousness while we are in a physical body. That is this place of union. It's an extraordinary opportunity that some of us have who are on this path. Those people of potential have this opportunity of having that breadth of understanding, of having the ability to retune and reperceive, so that they too can connect to that higher consciousness. That is the example that we are being given. So that brings us to the end of not only this set of 18 sayings, the second set, but also it's the end of the first 36 sayings. And what's been laid before us are some ideas, concepts that broaden our understanding of what we are. We are looking at a breadth now of non-physical and physical. There are also ideas about how we are created, the influences that make the familiar self, that thing that we call us, that voice in our head. And it also gives us a direction to go in and the steps that we need to take individually to find that place of union, and also to understand that that is an achievable state. If you are following this, then you are a person of potential, and that's not by accident. So there is this opportunity that you have to awaken, and all of the themes we've covered are essential to understanding and moving along this path. Shortly, we're going to be looking at the third 18, which gives another set of ideas and thoughts and subjects which are essential to this process. But for now, we'll bring this first 36 sayings to a close, and we'll move on with the next 18.